a little bit about everything, something you can spout out data and stories and quote Shakespeare at a dinner party. Greetings, fellow readers and citizens of the internet. My name is Eric, and today I am going to take you on a journey of how I fell in love with reading. All right, so basically, I was around 13 years old, a little bit younger, like 12 years old, right? And I grew up in a Christian family, and my mom would sometimes read the Bible to me in bed. And I remember she asked me, Eric, choose a book, just whichever one you want to read. And I didn't know about the Bible. I knew about the Bible, but I had never read for myself the Bible, so I didn't know what was where. I remember just landing on Romans and thinking, let's read Romans. And the reason why, I think, is because I've always loved Italian culture, especially Roman culture. I always liked the armor that the soldiers wore. I always liked any stories of Rome or video games or anything like that. And so I decided to read Romans. And as I was reading it with her, my curiosity started spiking. I believe she probably recommended me to start reading the Bible for myself. I'm not sure if that's correct, but all I remember is that I practically confiscated the Bible from her own Bible. Remember, it was this big Bible that was a bilingual Bible. It had English and Spanish, right? And I remember that helped me a lot, because if I didn't understand something in Spanish, read it in English, vice versa. Mostly I just read it in English. And I remember I just began taking this thing everywhere. I began taking it to school. I began taking it with me with my dad, because I would go I would work with him a lot. I would go to his work. And he would travel around go to multiple places and do multiple errands throughout the day. So he was driving a lot, and I would be in the back seat and I'd be reading the Bible. And I remember just being fascinated by it, being completely awestruck by it. And I remember after I read Romans with my mom, I began reading Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, on my own. And I remember that really took my breath away, because, it's a gospel and you have Jesus speaking, and that's what really made an impact on me. I remember it was just the way that he would respond to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and with authority, with intelligence, with composure, with a complete sense of certainty. But it was just something like you've never heard before. Something I had never heard before. It was definitely a demonstration of intelligence as well, of grace, of compassion, everything. So I remember that taking my breath away and completely shocking me, so I wanted to read more. Ambitiously, as a 12-year-old, my next book was the Book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, which is, by all accounts, a very intense and enigmatic book, to say the least. And I began reading that, and it wasn't necessarily that I comprehended everything as a 12-year-old. I believe I comprehended enough as a 12-year-old. But it wasn't the comprehension necessarily that I comprehended everything and I was shocked by it. It was more the symbolism, the language, and the power that you could see, that you can feel as you read the scriptures. And more than anything, the words of Jesus Christ blew me away. And it transformed my life tremendously in ways that I can't even express, nor will I in this video, because it's about reading and not about something that I experienced. So I would say fairly and honestly that it was the most profound, the most complex, and the most rewarding and incredible experience that I've ever experienced, ever. And 29 years old now, and still to this day, that was the experience that defines my life as everything about me. So there you go. That's how I fell in love with reading. And so once I realized that something like that could happen as you read a book, as you picked up a book and read words, that experience could take over you and happen. I later on, it was a while until finally, I went to Spain, and I believe there, when I was in school in Spain, they began assigning you books and stuff and poems and legends and stuff like that. And, I got kind of intrigued by that kind of thing, by reading stories. Really liked it. And then after that, I moved back to the United States, and, I took it back up again. I took it back up again, and I realized that I enjoyed stories. I really loved stories. So the reason why I kept reading was because I realized that if you could have an experience like that with a book, I want to read more books and have that experience, Now, I don't think that I was expecting to have that same experience with every book, the same experience that I had with the Bible, but I knew that regardless, the process of reading itself and story itself was transformative in a certain way, or was uplifting, or taught you morals and different things. I didn't consciously see it that way, it just happened. And so I began reading more books. I began reading especially classic literature, philosophy, spiritual books, all that kind of stuff. And in the beginning, I think one of the major motivators for sure was becoming more intelligent. It was becoming more, becoming more able to speak. What's that word? It's escaping me. Becoming more eloquent, becoming more, verbose. And that was something that was appealing to me. Also, I had this picture and this image in my head about the Renaissance man, right? The ideal Renaissance man that you hear of. Someone who kind of knows a little bit about everything. But I felt like if I could read books, I would begin to know a little bit about everything. Something you can spat out data and stories and quote Shakespeare at a dinner party. I wasn't going to any dinner parties, but just the idea of it was so appealing to me that I thought that it was incredible. I thought it was something that I wanted to do with my life. It was someone that I wanted to become. And, after I read a good share of books, I think the thing that really changed that motivator was acquiring a very sustainable and satisfactory vocabulary with which to express myself and with which to think. Once I knew that my vocabulary was on another level than most people, and it was some sort of competitive thing, like I want to become better than other people. Once I was satisfied with being able to express my emotions and my thoughts and my feelings and my desires and everything very, very clearly and very, very accurately, and put thoughts together and think a lot deeper, I was satisfied. I let go of the whole idea of the Renaissance man. I never really liked that phrase either. Like the Renaissance man, I don't really know. It's been overused and watered down. But anyways, I dropped that whole motivator, and I thought, I feel good about myself. I feel pretty intelligent. I feel like I can express myself at any given moment. So I kind of dropped that, and I realized I continued reading. My desire for learning and for reading did not go away. And I realized that I loved stories. I loved just the enjoyment of reading, of picking up a book, relaxing, and reading. It was something I enjoyed a lot. And now anyone might say, well, you get the same thing from movies. Why not just watch the best films? And that's not to say I love films, and I think they're amazing and incredible, but there is one thing that's lacking in films that you don't get in films that you do get from books, right? And that is basically, I know that there is this relationship between the writer and the reader. And there's infinite potential almost there's infinite potential in what you can imagine when you pick up a story and it starts speaking about an old castle with fog and a locked up princess or whatever. I don't know. I'm not reading kids' books anymore, but you get the idea. I'm just trying to paint a scene for you here, or like the scene of a suicide or something like that, right? And in your mind, I don't know, I'm getting dark with this, but let's go with it. Scene of a suicide, right? And in your mind, in the movie, they might portray it with one character. They choose one character, right? They choose Robert De Niro, let's say, and then he's committing the suicide for X, Y, and Z. He's expressing the emotion of someone about to commit a suicide. And then he goes and does it, and you see the scene, and it's powerful. It's amazing, because film is pretty powerful. But the opposite is that when you read it, there is so many connections in your mind from your own personal experience And that's the only place where you can draw from. You can only imagine something that you've experienced before, or seen before, or felt or thought before. So as you're reading, all those connections in your brain and in your heart and in your mind and memory come to life to create. So they are basically as the colors and the and the brushes with which you paint the scene. So it's you and the author working together to formulate your reading experience. And to me, that's incredible. But aside from just that, one more greater thing is the fact that I realized that I fell in love with words themselves. So I left you guys with the motivations of why I began reading, or how the motivations of why I read changed throughout my journey of reading. And so, in the beginning, as I said about the Renaissance man thing, and that word still just kind of makes me hurl a little bit. I don't know why. But, it started becoming with the fact that I fell in love with words. It wasn't for the sake of just pastime, or for the sake of getting lost in a novel or in a story and having another hobby. So it became more for the fact that I actually fell in love with words themselves, and I started falling in love with phrases, with sentences, with how you express an idea, how you express a scene, how you express an emotion, how writers, the best writers express themselves. And that was my fascination. I started becoming fascinated by just how you would put words, the right words in order to create a fascinating, enlivening, and just a very, very glimmering and rich sentence. So all the reasons, all the motivations were tapped in there. I believe the wanting to improve myself kind of motivation left a long time ago. And all that's left now is just kind of just the fact that, throughout history, the way people actually learn throughout history, the way people actually educate themselves, even now, to this day, is by reading. I recently also stumbled upon I believe it was an Oxford student. I think he was studying philosophy, I believe, and he was saying, what it was that he was paying all that money for, and it really just was to be assigned certain books. So he said, you can get an education, the same exact education that cost me X, Y, and Z, by going to a library and getting these books out. And I believe he even left in his description the books that he was assigned so far. And you can read those books, those titles, and you can have his same education that costs, thousands of dollars. So, that's still true, and I don't find any other way that educates me better than books. Even YouTube is becoming pretty popular, in which you can educate yourself pretty well, I guess okayly, through YouTube if you research something, or there's even lectures of professors talking on YouTube, but nothing does it quite as reading. It just takes such a commitment to open up a book, to be in silence, and to begin, using your eyes and your ears and your imagination and everything, all your resources, into looking at a page and reading it. There's nothing like it really to teach you or to develop you or to learn. I think there was one more thing that I wanted to say. So it's been a long journey. It's been a long while since I began first on this reading journey. And now, even after all this time, I can confirm, after reading probably most of the significant books of our culture, or lots of them, let's say, I still have a lot to go, but reading a lot of them, a lot of the fundamental ones, I can still say with the officers who were charged to arrest Jesus Christ, and then came back to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees, were, why didn't you arrest him? And they responded and said, no man ever spake like this one. No man ever spoke like this man before. And they were just flabbergasted or shocked or amazed. And so I can still say, after reading everything that I have to this day, that it's still my favorite book. It's still the one that I get the most out of. And I can still say no man ever spake like this man before. So that was what incited this initial love for reading, I believe, because it's the thing that I've read the most in my life. And it's the thing that has transformed me the most and been with me the most and been memorized in my heart and mind the most. Just to give you an example, or to show you some of how much I was reading. Look, there's pages falling out. This is not my first Bible, but one of the first ones when I was very, very young. And you just see the manic highlights everywhere. And I wouldn't recommend it. But in the beginning, I found everything incredible, so I highlighted everything. It was just something else. All right. Last but not least, a very crucial point that I forgot to mention previously was the fact that, as I mentioned, I grew up in a pretty religious household, very Protestant-like. And so I believe this is an initial idea from, let's say, the Catholic Church, that they would persecute anybody who would read different books, or they would burn books, and they wouldn't even allow the Bible to be read. All right, so the Protestants, have a lot of similarities with Catholicism, and one of those things was a fear of knowledge. I feel like they feared that if you were going to read, you would somehow end up, because of the whole Enlightenment movement. I think a lot of people don't know why, but it's perhaps because of the Enlightenment movement with the guy who wrote the encyclopedia. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was kind of part of that. Not really, I forgot who. Diderot, those kind of people. And then there was this whole wave of, Renaissance and literature and painting and philosophy and Darwinism and psychology. And so all these kind of things threatened the foundations of faith in God, for instance. And so there was always this culture of, if you read all these other books, you will end up like one of those people, those thinkers, those heretics, right? All right, so practically, that could be true for a lot of people. I think that, you kind of want to, for me, for my own approach, it was the fact that I had this curiosity, I wanted to learn, and I knew that my faith in God, let's say, was very, very firm. It was very, very cemented, even though that was more of that's what faith kind of was, that's what faith kind of is. It was a faith of not based on any logical, fully reasoned out sort of reasoning for why to believe in God. It was more of something from the soul, something from the heart, from the spirit. And then afterwards, I did start reading and expanding my mind into these other ideas, literature, philosophy, all kinds of stuff, science, psychology. And I did go through a rough patch, or let's call it a period of doubt, even a period of questioning, a period of angst, let's say. And I began trying to understand or trying to justify lots of things, because my reasoning mind became very much more active than it was before. And it never quite knocked me off my feet, but it did definitely make me have to adjust. It made me have to grow. It made me have to mature. And I'm not saying that this is the same process that everyone has to go through. I'm saying that kind of fear towards books in religion and my own personal journey with it was quite interesting. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to read secular books in philosophy and psychology. I do feel like the opposite happened for me, whereas there's this huge fear that your faith will be taken away. You will become an intellectual or something like that, and will stop believing in God, and stop using faith and start using only cold reason for any thought or any belief that you have. The opposite happened with me. Instead of becoming one of these cold intellectual kind of people, I definitely became more intellectually minded and more thoughtful and more questioning. But I did feel more, the majority of the influence was that it strengthened my faith. Yes, I know that might even sound hard to believe or impossible, but it actually was very much. because the things that are unknown are actually scarier when you don't know them than when you actually understand them. So I feel like that's really the religious fear there from a lot of religious movements and bringing up, is the fact that they just don't understand. You fear what you don't understand. So the more you understand different stances, different opinions, and you realize that people really have vastly differing opinions, even people with the same IQ, people who are just as smart, battling out together. I believe there was a quote once, I think it was from Fitzgerald or from a philosopher, or Fitzgerald was re-quoting a philosopher, but the quote is, the definition of intelligence, of a high intelligence, is to be able to have two warring ideas at the same time in your mind. Two opposing ideas at the same time in your mind, and still not make a decision about any. So I believe that to be the case a lot. And I feel like the opposite was the case for me. Instead of becoming a cold intellectual and losing my faith, it actually strengthened it, because I realized how much ideas were out there. I understood them a lot better, and I came to know that that there was no way that rationality and reason and just thinking and philosophy would in a major way bring you to some conclusion, to some grand conclusion. And I know that, it's my personal idea that there never will be any philosophy or any thought or government or technology that will ever bring the human thought and the human idea to a grand conclusion. And that's why faith exists, in my opinion. And, I learned that, I knew that, but I really learned it through reading everything, through reading a lot of things and understanding a lot of things, and through my own personal education, that there was no idea that fully beat the idea that I knew inside. And it only grew stronger, it only prevailed over everything else. So that was the case for me. It made me see that philosophy, even though it's hard to understand and can be daunting, is not as scary as one might think, and it does not have such a strong opposing reasoning against God or the Bible. And so I realized that for my own personal opinion, there was actually more evidence for God's existence in just the practical elements, nature, human nature, the grand design, everything basically about life itself and the mystery of living gives more testament to God than anything that composes a sort of philosophy or idea against it. I feel like it's a lot weaker than the evidence that there is for God in just living itself, just life itself. Aside from that, I went on and through books themselves, like Shakespeare and philosophy and literature, the greatest pieces of literature, the most timeless pieces of literature, and Shakespeare himself quoted the Bible more than any other book. So I believe, I haven't researched this, but I think that the Bible is the most quoted book ever. I know that it's the most sold book ever, so that's a big testimony to the strength and weight of the Bible itself. And then I know that for me personally, through reading, it's been the most quoted book that I've ever seen quoted throughout everything that I've read. And I've read pretty extensively at this point, and still the Bible is the most quoted book. That has to say something about it. Whether they were quoting it for or against, bad publicity is publicity. So, and most of it is just quotations with no real intention to defame, I think, in most literature. In philosophy, it probably might be a little bit different. But regardless, that has been my experience, and I felt like the need to say that. One more thing that I would have to clarify as well, there might be, let's say, a desire to not read any other books or concern yourself with other ideas if your entire purpose and your entire intention is a complete and ultimate devotion to God in contemplation. And I feel like people don't really understand, not even lots of religious people understand what that really is. But in a complete service towards God, in a complete contemplative lifestyle of only God being the only thought, and Him impregnating your entire thought and life and being. So that is a reason why you wouldn't undergo anything else as well as reading other ideas and books and other people. So that's one thing. But I feel like the actual reason why people tell you not to, or the fear that religion has, is more of learning stuff that will take you into atheism or some sort of other ideas that are contrary to the Bible, and you'll end up being influenced in a negative way and then won't believe any longer in the Bible. So in that sense, I feel like it's actually the opposite. Maybe it's not for everyone, but I feel like if you have a strong mind, if you have a strong faith, if you are someone who doesn't just get influenced easily by different doctrines and ideas and teachings and philosophies, then it is probably helpful to learn a bit about different things, and potentially it could actually strengthen your faith, seeing that things are less scary than they are, and less they have less of a constructed attack against God himself or the existence of God than one might possibly think. That's it for now. If you like, subscribe and like this if you want to hear more about these same ideas and topics.